What is going on, YouTube? Andrew Miller from Hook'emHeadlines.com coming back at y'all today with a news update, kind of a breakdown and looking at what's next for Texas after some unfortunate news today that Longhorns lost the commitment of five-star forward Ron Holland. It was earlier this afternoon on social media that Ron Holland announced that he would be reopening his recruitment, and it was reported soon after that even though he hadn't officially put in the request to release his national letter of intent from Texas, that was expected here in the near future. But I wanted to give some context to the situation, talk about the impact on Holland, on Texas, and really where Rodney Terry and the Longhorns go from here. I think that of the departures and decommitments for Texas so far this offseason, that this is probably the biggest, probably as well the most detrimental. I think Holland had the potential to be not only an all Big 12 caliber player, but a potential All-American. He's one of the top 5 ranked recruits in the 2023 class of the nation, and widely projected to be a top 3 or 5 pick in the 2024 NBA draft. So obviously this is a severe hit, but again, I want to kind of provide some context here and really see where Texas goes from here. So just to provide some notes, and if y'all haven't heard already, kind of the backstory on the situation. So Holland reopened his recruitment. There's no, he didn't flip or anything yet. There's no clear destination that is being reported for him. My understanding of the situation is that he's already fielding calls from dozens of colleges, literally coast to coast. There are a few schools that I think will be sticking out on his short list. He also mentioned that Texas would be one of his top schools, but we've heard that sort of rhetoric before. I think given the context here that Texas probably won't be the ultimate destination for Holland. When a recruit decommits, a recommitment is oftentimes not the case. More often than not, he ends up elsewhere. But Holland is a guy that I really thought would end up following through for Texas. He was more vocally supportive of Rodney Terry after he got the job, and even before he got the interim tag removed. We saw multiple instances of positive statements and endorsements coming from Holland for Rodney Terry, and that was especially the case after after he got the full-time head coaching job here a few weeks ago. But the thing that I thought had sealed the deal was that just a couple of weeks ago that it was reported that Rodney Terry was going in home for a visit to see Ron Holland, but that Holland and his camp essentially had reaffirmed that he was going to be on campus in June for the summer semester. Obviously, that is not the case now. If we look back at Holland's recruitment, there's some of the top schools before he had committed to Texas last year were Arkansas, UCLA. Those were the top 2, along with Texas. Kentucky was also in the mix. You had some other schools like Memphis, Memphis, Kansas, Houston, some of those that were pushing pretty hard, but ultimately some of the top schools. I think the schools that got the 5 schools that got the most recent visits from Holland were Texas, Arkansas, Kentucky, Memphis, and UCLA. So, those are going to be some schools to watch that are going to try to essentially flip his commitment here. 2 of the schools, I did a piece over at the site today that were mentioning potential destinations for Holland to maybe provide some clarity and, kind of reaffirm the point that I don't think Holland's going to end up on the 40 when it's all said and done. But 2 of the schools that I had mentioned as potential landing spots for him were Ole Miss and Arkansas. I've heard that Arkansas behind the scenes has kind of been, I've heard some things behind the scenes that, Arkansas has kind of kept their foot on the gas, or at least kept communication lines open in case something like this were to happen, to make sure that they still have a chance in this recruitment and, that they can position themselves well, which they probably are right now. Another school to watch here, I think, is going to be Ole Miss. You got the obvious ties to Chris Beard. Chris Beard was the one that won this recruitment for Texas last fall. Holland, that's the head coach that he committed to at the time. So Ole Miss is a school that you probably can't rule out here. The other destination that I had mentioned as, a legitimate possibility for Holland is the G League Ignite program. When he was down to about 5 or 6 finalist destinations last fall, the G League was one of the considerations. He did eliminate the G League when he had narrowed down his list to like 3 or 4 schools, but if that was a serious consideration for him before, I think that the G League is something that he might reconsider now. Certainly a possibility. If I expand the list, though, it sounds like he's getting calls from so many schools right now that, you would have to consider schools that are active in the portal: Kentucky, Memphis, UCLA, that were involved in this recruitment before as serious options because he's still got ties to these coaching staffs. Like I said, there's no definitive landing spot in mind for him right now, but I think there's some options that you could make an educated guess to. Arkansas, another thing I wanted to mention for that is he's his former teammate at Duncanville High School, Anthony Black, a 6'7" guard heading into his sophomore year. Already, kind of reached out to him on social media. He tweeted at Ron Holland after the news of his decommitment from Texas happened this afternoon. So, I want to kind of talk about what's next for Texas, what impact this will have on Texas as well. So, first we'll start with the impact that this has on Texas. I mentioned earlier that I think this is the biggest loss for the Longhorns so far, of any of the departures or decommitments that Rodney Terry has experienced this offseason. The loss of A.J. Johnson, the fellow 5-star signee in the Longhorns 2023 class, he decommitted and signed with the Illawarra Hawks in the NBL in Australia. I think that was a big loss, but, A.J. Johnson, the lower-rated recruit, I don't think as polished of a prospect coming out of high school. Ron Holland's a guy that just has insane physical tools, very, very gifted athlete, rebounder, great slasher. He can play multiple positions on the floor, and he's a good two-way player. I think A.J. Johnson still had a little bit more. He was more of a developmental prospect, certainly high upside, but Holland was the type of guy that he could come in and he was probably going to start immediately. And so, this leaves a pretty gaping hole on the roster, either at the 3 or the 4. He kind of had that he had that switchability where he could play it at either spot. This also hurts because Texas is losing some of the younger talent that it was going to get coming into the program. There's no incoming freshmen at this point because you've lost both of the signees that were in the 2023 class. So it becomes that much more imperative for Rodney Terry to maybe get a late pickup in the 2023 class. There's a few outstanding recruits that Texas has at least kicked the tires on in the 2023 class that have decommitted from other schools here in the last couple of months. Maybe Terry considers those options. I don't know 100% if that's going to be on the table, but certainly an option at this point, considering the lack of depth and young talent on the roster at the moment. Also, it makes the 2024 class that much more imperative. I've mentioned this on a number of shows now that the recruitment of the #1 recruit in the nation in the 2024 class, Dallas Lake Highlands wing Trey Johnson. He's got close ties with Rodney Terry. That was Terry's first visit after he was hired as the full-time head coach a few weeks ago. And so I think that recruitment becomes so much more imperative at this point. Otherwise, the roster makeup and just the long-term trajectory of the program, those are going to be the biggest difference makers here. I say the long-term trajectory, I do think that Holland was probably going to be a one and done, but you still have to consider the impact that he could have had on this program just for the 1 year he was here, and also the impact that has on recruiting in a positive sense. So, that will shake things up for Texas this offseason in very obvious ways, and it serves as a good transition point here because I'd like to talk about kind of what the roster situation looks like right now, and, in terms of reconstructing the roster this offseason, where do Rodney Terry and the Longhorns go next? So, at the moment, I believe Texas has 6 scholarship players that are projected to be on next year's roster. That's assuming that Tyrese Hunter comes back and that Dylan Mitchell does not. But, I think y'all should keep in mind that it is a possibility Dylan Mitchell comes back. I think he's more likely to be drafted. If you're comparing him and Hunter's draft stock, I think Mitchell would be the more likely player to actually get drafted this year. But I think ultimately, if you're looking at just the likeliest scenario, that you're probably getting one of the 2 back. So, assuming that is the case, Texas just landed Max Asmus, a huge get out of the portal, 4-year, I believe a 4-year starter, Oral Roberts, 2-time Summit League Player of the Year, and one of the best players that was in the portal this offseason. Also, I think Texas's top portal priority. I will have a video coming out here in the next day or so about Asmus's game, his impact on Texas, his fit here, things like that. But getting him is now that much more important. But also, it kind of dims a little bit of the shine and momentum that Texas is building on the recruiting trail by landing Asmus when you're losing Ron Holland the following day. Also, in the front court, you've got Dylan Dessou, senior big man, just announced his return to Texas for next season. He's got 1 year of eligibility remaining. Texas also landed Caden Shedrick, a redshirt junior center from Virginia. He's got, I believe, 2 years of eligibility remaining, so he could be a multi-year impact guy. At this point, very likely to be in the starting lineup. I think he was likely to be in the starting lineup before the Holland news anyway. And then the remaining players on the roster, you got Brock Cunningham. He's returning, I believe, for his 6th year. So he's got 1 year of eligibility remaining. And then Alex Anamikwe, 2nd year forward. He was more of a reserve guy last season, but he's a guy that I think could have some upside, especially on the defensive end of the floor. Has some potential as a slashing wing and forward. He's very strong. He's got pretty good physical tools, and they're going to be relying on him this season with the way the current roster looks. So, with Texas having 6 scholarship guys remaining, there's some outstanding guys in the portal right now that I think Terry and the Longhorns are going to have to throw everything at and more. A few of the remaining portal priority recruits right now, I think the biggest one at the moment, especially after losing Holland, is going to be Zarek Onyema, the junior power forward transfer from UTEP. Sounds like that's going to be a battle between Texas and Vanderbilt. He had visited Vanderbilt earlier this week. I believe that visit just wrapped up yesterday. He's also expected to visit Texas here in the coming weeks. I would expect that to happen, though, probably next week. Texas Tech and Ole Miss are 2 schools that are expected to be involved here as well. Texas was originally recruiting Onyema out of the portal as more of a reserve, and I think that could still be the case. But if he comes in, then he's going to play a more pivotal role than I think Terry and the Longhorns were originally anticipating, with Holland no longer projected to be on the roster. Another important portal recruitment, especially after this news, is Shendall Weaver, the freshman. I believe he was the WAC freshman of the year. Transfer from UT Arlington. He's a guy that just shot the lights out at UTA last season. One of the best shooters, I think, available in the portal as well this offseason. Texas is expected to be one of his top schools, but I think he's considering 4 or 5 finalists at the very least at the moment. But it sounds like Texas is really prioritizing that portal recruitment. So Weaver's going to be a name to watch moving forward. Texas still needs to add a lot of guard depth here. At the moment, you have 1 guard that's projected to be like a solid guy that's going to be on the roster next season. Because again, I expect Hunter to be back more than likely, but no guarantees. The 2 other portal recruitments that I think are going to be important to watch. One, I don't know how much Texas is still involved in this recruitment at this point, but I think it could still be something, especially, again, with that, you still have that opening at the 3. You have no one right now that can be starting at the 3 unless you wanted to put like Brock Cunningham in that spot. And that's Trey White. He's a USC transfer. After Texas missed on junior USC transfer shooting guard Reese Dixon Waters, who committed to San Diego State a couple of weeks ago, you didn't really have a clear idea of who the priority wing was going to be in the portal for Texas. Rodney Terry is valuing some portal experience or some proven experience on the wing. Texas had that guy last season in Serge Barry Rice that came in and was, by many media publications, the national 6th man of the year. One of the biggest portal additions of any program last offseason. And so, I think landing a guy like Trey White is going to be really big for Texas. Again, a 6'5", or actually I think, about 6'5", 6'6", freshman wing from USC that, could really help Texas with, some length and some potency in the backcourt. Also kind of a guy that can fill that slashing wing mold that has some grittiness and length on the defensive end. And then at the moment, I think the last transfer name I really wanted to mention is Damian Collins, a sophomore big man out of Kentucky. Collins was a name that kind of caught my eye when he entered the portal earlier this week. He's a guy, former 5-star recruit, top 20 kid in the nation in the 2021 class. But Texas was one of the top schools for him out of Atlanta High School in Texas. But he didn't have the impact that I think a lot of people expected him to have on Kentucky right away, especially given his talent level. He averaged somewhere in the ballpark of like 2 points, 2 rebounds per game in the last couple of seasons. He was really just a reserve guy in their front court. But I think Texas needs that type of talent, that type of potential, a guy that's going to have multiple years of eligibility remaining that can be a long-term piece in this front court unit. Because right now you don't really have that. Maybe Onyema comes in. I believe he has 3 years of eligibility remaining, so maybe he can be a longer-term guy. But in terms of high upside, you don't really have that staple in the front court right now. I think Holland was, again, probably going to be a one and done, but at least in terms of young talent and potential, he was going to be that guy in the program to kind of spark some of that excitement, that energy into the front court. And maybe Collins can be that guy. He's a guy that Texas has had a couple of conversations with, at least from my understanding. So that's going to be a name to watch moving forward. But those 4 names that I had mentioned, Onyema, Weaver, and then White and Collins, I think those are some of the top portal names to watch, which, the portal window's still open for another couple of weeks for basketball, and more big names expected to go in, not as many as you've seen in the last few weeks, but, Texas, they got to round out this roster, and the portal is going to be the main source of that depth from here on out this offseason. So anyway, for Andrew Miller, Hook'em Headlines, that's pretty much it. Hook'em.